I'll give an intro to our community that's fighting air inequality, and I hope we also have a good chunk of time for discussion as well. We have a nonprofit here in DC called OpenAQ. I will give a short outline for the presentation, go over sort of what does our community mean when they say the term air inequality. We'll take sort of a sidestep and talk about what is fully open data. And then in the context of what does that mean for air quality and why it's important and powerful. I'll introduce the OpenAQ platform, sort of the technical piece, sort of the guts of what our community uses, and then I'll talk about what the community actually does, really the heart of what we do, of how they're using that data and connecting with each other to fight air inequality. And then at the very end, I'll mention ways if you're hopefully interested in getting involved to do that. The main motivation of our community is, again, fighting air inequality. It's a term we use to describe the really human rights injustice of air pollution and to capture the unequal access to clean air to breathe across the world. It still surprises me when you look at the statistics around air pollution. No one dies of air pollution disease, but in terms of the global burden of disease, it's responsible for 1 out of 8 deaths on the planet. And so it's one of the globe's biggest killers, let alone invisible killers. And I think something that goes a little bit under the radar as well is it's also has a huge burden of disease on children. Sometimes air pollution is thought of as an older person disease where you die a little bit younger, a few years earlier, and so it affects you sort of at the tail end of life, but it also does affect children and their well-being as well. In fact, it kills more children globally than malaria. And so the other really motivating piece in our community is we care about air inequality, but we believe at the end of the day that it takes really a lot of public will and a plan, often policy, and really any solution in that space to fight air pollution at some level, at some foundational level, involves air quality data. It might not be able to institute those solutions on its own, but it can. It's a necessary but insufficient condition to tackle the problem in most places. So we'll dive into air inequality in a few different ways. So the first way is with this graph. What this graph shows is each dot is a country. And this axis shows the GDP per capita in US dollars for each country based on some World Bank data. And then this axis shows annual or yearly values of pollution data, outdoor air pollution data, specifically particulate matter that's 2.5, so small or fine dust and smoke pollution and in the air. And so you can kind of see a fairly tight correlation between GDP per capita decreasing and increasing pollution levels, with the exception of these 3 outliers, which are UAE, Bahrain, and Qatar. And if you color code it, you can see there's definitely at the higher pollution end countries that come from that are in Africa and Asia Pacific especially. And the thing that's missing from this graphic is there's also missing data. There's many places that aren't represented on here simply because there isn't data available. This is from the World Health Organization's 2016 outdoor air pollution database. This was just updated a month or 2 ago as well. So it'd be interesting to replot this and see if the situation has changed. If you look at air inequality in a slightly different way, in terms of a research lens, you can check out this graphic. So this shows the number of papers for a given city and air pollution, putting that search in a web of science, so basically a giant repository of peer-reviewed scientific papers, and seeing how many studies you get out. So LA is well studied, London's well studied. It's not going to get every single study, it's really just a proxy. And then on this axis, it's PM10 pollution, so smoke and dust pollution. And this is slightly older data from WHO's outdoor air pollution database in 2011. I think the very first time they did it. And so what you notice is that although London is super well studied, as is LA, you see these places that are really not well studied, yet have pretty high air pollution levels. In fact, for this database, they were the top 10 most polluted places. And if you, that's the actual list. So this was the top 10 most polluted places by PM10 yearly levels available at the time in 2011. That was publicly available to the WHO. And so if you sum up all those red dot places for the number of papers on air pollution in those cities, you get 41 papers total. That's 5 times less than the number of papers for Houston, Texas, which has an order of magnitude or more cleaner air. And so you can look at this and you see an inequality, but you can also ask yourself, does it matter scientifically? Are we missing any science or public health information around this? And I would argue you definitely are by not studying air pollution in the most polluted places. For example, just looking from public health or the relative risk of death due to PM 2.5, that smoke and dust pollution. This is a simplistic adaptation because I'm not a public health person. I'm an atmospheric scientist by training, so I like the simple adaptation from the study that looked at a bunch of different data sources and sort of adapted a model to what does it look like when you increase pollution levels, how does your relative risk of mortality increase? And so at lower levels, levels that are now common in the EU and the US, we know that correlation pretty well. It's also fairly linear, looks something like that. But the issue is, in those most polluted places, we don't yet have a fine-grained understanding of what the shape of that curve looks like. We know it's something like this, but we rely on fewer large cohort epidemiological studies, or fewer public health studies at a larger scale. We rely on proxy data from, say, secondhand cigarette exposure, smoke exposure. But you can imagine if you're in a country and setting policy where levels are up here, it's really important to know if I have a 10% reduction, what kind of result can I expect? And interestingly, and somewhat in a difficult thing, is that reaction by reducing pollution by 10% up here is going to be less. It seems to be less sensitive, less big result than if you reduce those same levels by 10% down here. But exactly how is not clear to know because there's just not as many studies in those most polluted places. So those studies, that inequality does matter. And another way of looking at this, and this is a very staggering fact to me, is that if you go back into Web of Science and you look at those most cited large cohort epidemiological studies, those large scale public health and pollution studies that are most cited, 7 out of 10 of them relied on government data. And they're most cited, and that's sort of an academic metric, but these same papers are the ones that are used by nations and by internationally to set standards and guidelines for air pollution levels across the world. So they have a huge impact, and they relied at some level on a government-provided air quality data. And so that's sort of some of the logic behind why we got interested in open air quality data specifically, like making air quality data more available. But the heart of it, which Seth touched on a little bit, really started for me in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. It looks like this in the wintertime. Typically, this is the center square. It's very common for the air to be very thick, and you can taste the air at times. Because there's so much particulate matter in the city. It's also really cold. It's not atypical for it to be minus 40 Fahrenheit or Celsius. They overlap at that level. You get icicles on your eyelashes. And this, because of the cold, it's actually one of the reasons why it's so polluted, is that people must burn a lot of fuel in order to stay warm. Oftentimes coal, especially in the outer areas, and it creates a variety of other factors, create sort of this perfect storm for pollution. So I was doing postdoc work there, fairly academic work by the nature of it, yet to our south in Beijing, we noticed something else going on around the same time. This was about 2011 to 2013. Around 2011, and really before that, but when we noticed it, there was a air quality monitor put on the top of the U.S. Embassy that was sharing out air quality data, specifically PM 2.5, this more health relevant air pollution parameter. And the data was being gathered by other groups, independent, in China. So there was app developers who were grabbing this data from the monitor that was being shared on Twitter. Folks were seeing it on Twitter. The data that was being pulled into apps was suddenly in the hands of millions of Beijingers on their phone for the first time in a way that they could process and understand it. It was less technical. It was something that the public could interpret. So having the data available pushed out through Twitter, made through apps, was getting a lot of attention in Beijing. And folks started wondering with the available Chinese data, what were the differences between that data source and the US data source? Why were some measurements of one pollutant, PM10 versus PM 2.5? So it created this whole conversation, and in the end, both of these sources of open data ended up generating a stronger focus on the more health-relevant pollutant, an expansion of monitoring across Beijing and eventually China, greater transparency in general as well around the data, and also push forward policies. And year on year, I mean, Beijing still has a huge air pollution issue, but year on year since 2014, PM 2.5 levels on a yearly basis have reduced. I'm not sure if that's true for 2017, but 2014, 2015, 2016, this was the case. So it's had an impact. And so anyway, we saw this in Ulaanbaatar, and we're like, wow, this one little monitor, not this crazy technical difficult thing to operate or put up, had such an impact. So why don't we try that? Because if folks really wanted to know, one of the questions I would get when talking about my fairly detailed research was, well, what are the pollution levels? That's what we want to know. And what are they right now? Like, can I go outside right now? Is it wise to go outside right now? What do those levels even mean? So what we did at the National University of Mongolia was set up an air quality monitor there, and we shared the data out on Twitter and Facebook. And it was not the first monitor in the country. There was air quality monitoring data, but it was very difficult to access, which is why we created this. And then the thing that we did was share it through social media, so it was pushed out and much more publicly visible than the existing data at the time. And we also got students involved to help take that technical information that was being tweeted and Facebook posted and give some context to it and talk with various groups to explain what it meant. And surprisingly, so this was a very small side project of a side project. It really had an impact relative to its size. My Mongolian collaborator was called into the Mongolian parliament to talk about the role of science and data. Because of really, I think, the publicity that this project got. Various media groups covered not just our project, but like air pollution in general, including National Geographic Mongolia in the city of Ulaanbaatar. And so it really sparked a dialogue. And so for me, this was a huge thing to see that we were doing this little side project and it had this impact. And this wasn't the first time. In Beijing, clearly there was an even larger impact in a much larger city. So it started making us wonder, what could you do if you made air quality data that already exists, not new data, but if you just made that existing air quality data, that data that was difficult to find on a website somewhere that was already being done and supported financially by many governments around the world, what would happen if you made that data more available so people can create apps or engage with the data in various ways? So we started looking around and realized there was actually a really wide open data landscape in terms of real-time ground monitoring air quality data produced by governments around the world. All kinds of different forms and shared in various ways that are either friendly or less friendly to access programmatically or in a way that maybe a researcher or, say, an app developer might want. Oftentimes in tables that might be updated in an hour, and then that data disappears for easy or very quick access to the public. But there was a ton of data. So we estimate there's about 75 countries across the world that generate government-grade real-time data or near real-time data. And I'm speaking specifically, again, of ground monitoring stations, not satellite data, not mobile sources, or low-cost sensor data, but typical government regulatory type monitoring. For those that are interested, these are the typical pollutants. I've mostly talked about PM 2.5 and PM 10, but we also see these pollutants as well being typically generated by governments. Estimate somewhere in the ballpark of 5 to probably 10 million data points per day are produced across the world that are in some way or another, but again, they're in disparate formats, so they're not necessarily easy to get to or access. So we saw there was a gap. We saw this from that landscape. We see a ton of disparate data that exists. From our experiences in Mongolia, from what we saw in Beijing, and also from what we knew from research literature and public health policy, there were a ton of different sectors that could take that information if they could access it in a nice way, which means different things for those different groups, and run. Again, just because you give them that data access doesn't mean necessarily they can take it, but they can't get to it in the first place to even take that step. So what we do is a very, very simple thing with OpenAQ is we provide a open and free programmatic, meaning someone can get that data automatically in a way that doesn't require manual inputs, but like say a computer could talk to a computer to get that information. That the information is transparent with how we gather it, so there's no black box of how we're gathering that information, but someone can see that. It's accessible, and again, that means different things for different groups. And I'll show some examples of how that information is available. And that most importantly, and sounds like the most sort of in the weeds thing, is that the data layer is universal, so that it's all formatted in the same way. That's super powerful for convening a community of people at various levels to get around that data. The data is essentially in the same language, you can imagine, so that's powerful. And that's where we work. So that sort of brings me into what is fully open data. So I think this is something that tends to go a little bit under-mentioned, sort of the power of fully open data, and what does that even mean? We talk about open data a lot in various sectors, and we know it's a good thing, but sort of what is fully open data as opposed to just open data? And I'll go through some examples. But in general, you can see this defined in various ways, but they tend to be around these three bullet points. So fully open data is where each data unit is in a predictable format. The entire data set is organized consistently among itself. And then thirdly, really importantly, the data is actually findable. So you can have a great PDF, but if it's not information that you can access, let alone find on a given website somewhere, it's not fully open data. So we'll talk about an example to kind of give these sort of, I don't know, more tangible meaning. So you can imagine if we were in this room, had a pile of, let's say, air quality textbooks, maybe not the most exciting books to have a pile of, but for most people, but imagine we had that in this room, and that's cool. So we could ask ourselves, is that fully open data? So it's there for the taking. So in one sense, it's open data. It's available to us. And you can imagine for each, so if we go through each thing, the first one, imagine I grab a book, and it's going to look like a typical book. It's going to have a title. It's going to have an author. If you open it up, it'll have chapters. So that first bullet point, each data unit, each book, unless something really weird's going on, is going to be in a predictable format. So that's cool. That's our first checkpoint. The second question, is the entire data set organized consistently? Well, if it's in a pile, and I'm maybe in a time crunch and I want to find a particular book, it's not organized consistently. It's in a pile, right? It's not organized. So that doesn't really fit. And then you can imagine if we had a couple piles, maybe books with different themes, who knows, in front of us. Well, that's also not, data set is not very findable among other piles of books or other data sets of books. So that's not fully open data. Well, how would we organize that information? And I like the book analogy because I think it's an old one. We think of open data as this new concept, but really it's an old one. It's just organizing information for sort of public good. So we've totally figured this out with books. One step, if we want to get that second bullet point, one way we organize a pile of books is very simply with a bookshelf. We can organize it alphabetically. We could organize it by theme. The data set is organized now consistently among itself. It's not too tricky. But you can imagine if we had a bookshelf on one topic again and a bookshelf on another topic, and we use different schemes for organizing them. Again, one's alphabetic, one's by color of the book or something like that. They're not necessarily still fully open data. And again, old problem, we figured this out. Open data for books is not a particularly tricky problem. We solve it with a library, where you can have bookshelves of various topics on various things, organized in a way where anyone can go in there with fairly little hassle. They know where to find the information. They know it's organized in a consistent way. And so that's fully open data. And sort of this is a long explanation of saying, essentially, you could ask yourself one question when you're opening up data and you want to do so fully. Are you producing the data in such a way that others can seamlessly work on top of the data? So, you know, for a library, are you making it such that a student can walk in and do a report, someone else can go in and do research or look up an article they're writing, say someone from the media? But the question is, can they seamlessly do that? Can they do that without any sort of barrier or a lot of work on their part? So to turn that back to air quality data, we'll look at a couple government sites. The Mongolian one, for example, the existing one now, agar.mn, and the US air quality site by the EPA here. And you know, they've got great front ends themselves. They give you the air quality information that you might want as someone from the public. They're super useful. If you wanted to build something on top of them, as just looking at the front end, the website, they're kind of an end to themselves. It's not very easy to do that. It's a bit difficult. But the nice thing about both of these government sources is they have really nice backends where that data is shared. The same API that powers, say, the Mongolian website is also available to the public. And similarly for the US EPA, there's an OpenAPI and an FTP server. So technical pieces that allow that data to be built upon by others' uses than just, say, that website. And so the other key with air quality data specifically is both these data sources also share the physical, scientific, actual, real air quality data, not something sometimes termed an air quality index or a country-specific sort of policy determination of the level of health of the air. So they actually share the data one would want to use. And again, the question is, can others seamlessly build on top of that data? And this data is shared in such a way where if someone wants to build an app, if someone wants to potentially build a front end for scientists or for media folks to access that information or create graphs, they can do that pretty easily. Now, one remaining issue is that, say, for both of these countries, it's really cool that they have the data is available to the public so they can build on it, but they share the data in different ways. So very naturally, right? One country's producing data in one format. They're not necessarily coordinating with other countries around them for a lot of reasonable and logistical reasons. So they share that data in a different format. So to build a tool seamlessly on top of both of these countries would require, again, extra work for someone. So that's sort of where, again, OpenAQ in this context for air quality comes in, but you can imagine you could generalize this for any open data topic. So I'll sort of talk through a schematic of an open data pipeline. It's going to be more air quality specific, but again, it doesn't need to be. You can insert whatever environmental or other parameter you want in there. And so we'll talk about, we'll have three examples. One is data source, say an air quality data source from government A. Maybe they produce this data in order to make a website, like we saw before, to let the public know about an air quality issue. Then we have source number two. Maybe this is a researcher. They're doing some sort of public health study. So it's powering this single research study. And then you have data source number 3, another government, government B. Maybe they're building a website and they also are producing a device-specific app or an app in general. And so these 3 data sources don't know about each other. They're not findable. They're probably sharing data in a different format from one another because they really don't have any reason necessarily to coordinate. They're probably very different funding sources. And so the data is all over the place and messy from the viewpoint of someone who would want to use this information to do something outside of those very specific use cases by each entity. And so what this results in is a smaller, disparate audience for that set of data. It's sort of segmented into three piles. So the way to overcome this, again, is this sort of programmatic, open, and free access to the data that's aggregated from all across those sources and universally formatted. So you don't have to do all that work to seamlessly build on it. And for the air quality world, like many open data issues, the data is shared in different ways across all of these different data sources. So, maybe government A shares their data in a really nice way. They have that nice back end where we can get the data programmatically, an FTP server, API, maybe even a Dropbox folder with nicely formatted data, all consistently formatted. You know where to find it. The second source, maybe it's a little trickier to access. The researcher wants to share it, but it's some work has to be done in order to share it. And the third source, maybe it's not shared so in such a easily accessible way. Maybe it's just shared on a website that someone has to scrape. At any rate, pull all this data in. The idea is that you universally format it, and it's much nicer and neater to build on top of in a variety of ways for a variety of use cases. And so this rectangle piece of the arrow is sort of this kind of piece that does the dirty work of just untangling that information in the first place. It doesn't generate new information. It doesn't necessarily create outputs. It just lets people and orgs build on top of that information in a variety of ways. So once that data is universally formatted, what can happen is that you have the ability, at least, on a much wider level to build apps to use the information for policy on a different scale. All of those different items that we'd mentioned. The one important item is it also lets you build sort of this ecosystem of people who can build, conduct sort of more open work on top of the information. So it lets people build open source tools. You have difficulty building open source tools on data sets that are all really messy in different formats. Doesn't really save anyone time to work together to do that. But this has a much larger public audience and can be more fully utilized. So that data can really sort of realize its full potential by sharing it in this way. And so we sort of do, again, that kind of not particularly glamorous work behind the scenes of just making that system nice in the first place. And the other piece that I'll mention in a little bit is we also wrangle, we use sort of the gravity of the data that's universally formatted to get people in all these different sectors, especially locally, talking with one another. So then I'll give a short intro to what our platform actually does now that I've talked about what is fully open data and specifically air quality data. So for about 2.5 years, we've been aggregating real-time, near real-time data from governments and research orgs across the world. To date, we have about 65 countries' data accessed into our system and properly attributed to each source. Since we're kind of like that library, we're not the data generators, nor would we want to be confused with it. When you go to a library, it'd be quite something if the library claimed that they wrote the books. So we attribute each source to where it comes from. We get about 500,000 more each day, and we make this available, I'll show on our website, but programmatically through an API, but also in a way that's a little bit friendlier for other folks to access. And in addition, we also have folks in our community who go that extra step of really making that information friendly to other folks in ways that they're better at than us. So if I click on the data and the countries, it'll take me to this tab. And it gives a list of the countries, the number of measurements, and locations. If we click on, say, Chile, You get a card for each station in Chile. This just shows right now PM 2.5 data, but it'll tell you the other parameters if they're measured. These are all PM 2.5. There's PM 10. This one has a bunch of different types. And it'll tell you how long they've been collected since, and you can see the source of the data, the attribution, and then you can download the data. Before we do that, I'll go to our map, which is here.
There's no air quality index, right? You're just showing
Yeah, this is all physical data, so we don't access, we purposely do not ingest data that's air quality index values or recalculate what they would be as physical values. We only collect physical data. And this is showing PM 2.5 as the default, but there's different pollutants. We could look at ozone across the world in various places. There's different coverage for different pollutants depending on the pollutant. And you can definitely see gaps where existing air quality data either doesn't exist or isn't currently publicly shared. But if we click on, say, a place in the US where we are, we can, so this is near us. This is quite a low value for PM 2.5, tells you more nearby stations. We could click view more or compare. I think the next tab shows compare, yes. And so you can pick different places. I picked Bogota, Colombia. We could pick Delhi. We could pick any other places that share that particular pollutant and compare them here, color coded. So the purplish is the one near us. Bogota is in red or orange, and you can see the most recent data. And again, this is not the programmatic access piece. So there's an API that is also linked that if you were a developer or someone else who wanted the technical access, you could do that under here if you wanted the docs. But this lets, say, a developer or a researcher or a journalist kind of at least play with the data before they start really doing any sort of analysis. It's a lightweight tool to do that. So maybe you see something interesting here. You're curious about this data source. And I think I actually opened, no, I didn't. So it's here, and you could download the data for the period that you want. Of course, it's not going to have all the way back. It'll only have as recently as we started accessing the data in the first place. And it'll download it as a CSV file. You could put it into your favorite statistical analysis tool of choice, like Excel. You pick your pollutants, and there you go. Conversely, again, if you wanted to use an API to do that or other method, you could do that too. So I'm going to get into our community very shortly, but this is on our website. Some of the things that groups in our community have done. This isn't all of them. It's sort of what folks have actively mentioned to us, and we're interested in having their work showcased. There's various apps and websites and interfaces that humanize this data a little bit more than what you see here. This is fairly technical. There's research studies of various sorts. One is a real-time wildfire project that ingests the data. I believe they access this data mostly for the US right now. I think one of the reasons that they ingest data from our system is because they may want to internationalize it, and so then they don't have to change the data format. A few open source projects we'll mention. Recently, there's a watch we learned that ingests the information to share that information, and a few other tools. But we'll talk about that briefly. And so one really important thing to emphasize about that whole system, whether it's the back end, whether it's the front end website, is all of it's created by a community of people. There's not a number of software developers in DC as part of OpenAQ that are building this. It's really a bunch of people around the world who have stumbled upon the project and wanted to see it built for a variety of reasons. One, because it's a lot easier, again, to have sort of this larger project rather than to build it all yourself, and much more robust scientifically and technically. Another reason is sometimes folks want to see their data on the map. We had someone from Sweden who contacted their environmental administration in Stockholm to get their data on the map to help share that information. And so this person wrote the code to connect the data from this government source to our system. We're on GitHub. So they contributed that code, we reviewed it, and then once we approved it and pulled it in, it was live on the system. Other people help out because they want to do some good. So a software developer in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, sort of where the seed of this idea started, heard that folks in Tuzla, Bosnia were battling a similar issue with really severe air pollution in the wintertime from a factory, and they were writing data down by hand. It was not a great thing to have to take turns to do over 24 hours, and so Dolgun ended up writing the code that would access that information for them, and so they could click a button and download that data instead. And we actually now work with various folks in the Bosnian government to share that data in a more accurate and updated way. So on to the community impact. I gave a little bit of a glimpse on our community page, but to me this is really where the rubber meets the road and the true value of the project. So just by numbers, we see a fair amount of data requests per month, about 5 million data requests to the system. Pretty wide geographic spread for cities and countries that are interested in the data. Lots of research orgs, and we also have one of the main ways our community engages is through Slack, so a chat channel where people can publicly join and freely join and talk with other folks around the world in various sectors to talk about their work. We have a section for the developers who often have these very technical conversations, folks doing machine learning on the data, and then we've got more general conversation. We have channels for different regions as there's interest. People can create their own channel as there's interest as well. So, one of the questions you ask is how can having all this open data matter? How does it actually have impact? And so we've seen it in 4 different ways. I'm just going to go through these one at a time with examples, but just to put them up there. One way is that we see that, and these are the ways I've been giving the most examples, are making this data more available or more connected to the public with a wider audience and a wider use case means there's more mutually beneficial outputs from citizens, that they can produce some of those outputs we looked at. And I'll give some examples of that, and then we'll go through each of the other ones one by one. So for example, recently we've learned that some scientists have accessed the data from the OpenAQ platform from various governments and researchers to figure out what's the typical city level air quality like over the course of a day in the world. This was a question we actually didn't know. It's not something you can get from satellite information, and certainly simultaneously either as well with satellite information. And so this has helped inform some basic understanding of what a typical air pollution footprint is like in a city anyway, but it has specifically helped inform future NASA satellite mission for figuring out when it's most interesting to look, to position the satellite so it's looking at a given city for air quality or set of cities. I mentioned one of these studies already. Another one is folks have used data from the platform to figure out air quality scenarios, specifically ozone over India. Otherwise, it was difficult to access that information, according to the person who wrote the article. We've also seen uptick, a major use case from both the private sector and the public sector is around low-cost sensors. So low-cost sensors have a lot of promise and are really cool, but one thing that helps make them more accurate is being able to calibrate them with government and research grade data, especially when it's available in real time. You can imagine if you're running a low-cost sensor, you don't want to wait a month to check if your instrument was actually doing what it should have done. And so one place that mentions the OpenAQ platform for this purpose is in a draft piece by folks associated with the World Meteorological Organization on low-cost sensors. Other community work, we have a few examples of journalists using the data. My favorite example, and one of the ones we had earlier on, was from Oyuka Munkbat in Mongolia, who's done articles where she compares air quality in Ulaanbaatar with Beijing. And she's done that with another person in our community who I'll mention shortly. There's Amrit Sharma, who's now based in Canada, spent time in India and Nepal, and he's made this Smokey, the air quality bot that's very friendly and very much humanizes the air quality data coming from the technical data coming from the platform. Oh, and one example is, so he has made Smokey the air quality bot on Twitter in various languages, one of them Nepali. So if you find him on Twitter or find Smokey Nepali on Twitter and put hashtag Kathmandu, and you'll get back the latest air quality data that's available there. And this will work for various other places as well, as there's information available in the first place. And then there's Maëlle Simon, and she's done open source packages that help analyze air quality data. And she's actually worked through finding each other on Slack. She actually found Oyuka, and they connected, and they worked on that article together. So Maëlle is now based in France. She was in Spain. She's able to connect with someone in Mongolia, and both of them were able to build something, write something that they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise, without access to the data and without being able to connect with each other. So the second point is that having this air quality data possible, open in the first place, makes possible universally usable open source tools. Again, if their data is all in a different format, that doesn't happen. And so I'm just going to put up some examples from different languages. You'll see Maëlle up here again, and a different data exploration tool. These are all open source projects on top of our system that people in our community have built and shared with the community. We also keep a community wish list of what people are interested in doing. One of those happens to be an open source tool where we worked with, from funding from the World Bank and in collaboration with Development Seed, which is based here in DC, and a few other orgs, a air quality checks program that helps flag the data. We don't change the data in any way. We keep it as is, and there's some checks, quality checks you can do. So we keep it that way for transparency, but if you're going to use it on top, it's nice to have this open source tool that people can use. And we've shared that, all that's been entirely shaped and shared with the community. And then the main last one that I'll have examples for is by having this data open, something that surprised us is that it actually improves data quality and data sharing, which we didn't anticipate. So we've seen as this data has been more widely available and there's more eyes on the data, it's generated better data quality. And I'll give an example. So we had two community members who we've met through workshops we've run, one in Kosovo and one in India, who happened to notice an issue with air quality data in each place being shared. It's kind of a technical thing. I won't go into the details, but essentially there's an issue with the way the real-time data was being shared from a US source in those places. And so they let us know. We looked into it, and there appeared to be a small issue to us. We contacted folks at the EPA here, and they responded very quickly and fixed the issue, and also let us know that these two, by saying something, had fixed not just the data in their two places, but actually from real-time data feed across the US for US sources. So because these two folks could have access to the data, they helped improve a data source halfway around the world, and doing this in their spare time. We've also found that as we'll visit various places and show that our simple map, or just show that various data sources are available, other places will say, hey, we'd like to share our data too. And so we've worked with a couple governments to better share, or share in the first place their air quality data because they want to make it more available. We recently, a few months ago, we did this with the government of Colombia. So more data begets more data oftentimes in terms of openly sharing it. And one of the really cool things to me is that by having this whole platform open source, it helps catch issues as well. So on our end for OpenAQ, we've caught mistakes in our platform by having it be so open, and people call out issues where we might have made a mistake. And the last one, I think it's probably the most important one, really. I think by having data more openly available, it engenders trust and even support from the public. We've seen this in a few places, and I'll just very, very briefly mention our workshops that help do that work. But I'll also say even for our own platform, we found more trust in our work because it's completely open and transparent. So with that, we do workshops in various communities. We've done 5 so far. These workshops convene various people in different sectors, initially around the data and data access and talking about how to access that information from our system. But really our goal is to convene these different sectors on a local level and get them working not just with the data, but connecting substantively with each other. And again, I mentioned we do this also virtually through Slack. But with the workshops, often the outcomes end up being beyond data themselves, and through to that trust point, we get folks, for instance in Sarajevo, folks from the government and an activist and a public policy person actually working together to put on field campaigns, figuring out how much pollution is coming from where. That's not something that the technical piece of OpenAQ solves. It's really that community piece. And this will be this is now ongoing. They've put on this campaign this past winter. So they had this idea at the workshop. They found a way to make it happen, and it's the first field campaign to figure out how much pollution is coming from which sources in Sarajevo. And similarly, we just held a workshop in Accra, Ghana, and this was a very diverse group, including folks from the government and researchers and journalists and all kinds of different folks. But immediately after, we had two folks from the research side go on radio and talk about why air quality was important in Accra and why researchers, why the community should be supporting the government and especially the Environmental Protection Agency in Ghana to fight air pollution, because they felt it was really underfunded once they talked with government officials. So with that, this is the end. If you're interested in getting involved, one of the basic and easiest and quickest ways is to join us on Slack, a really friendly community. If you know of other data sources, let us know. If you're interested in writing code, even better. If you do something on cool on top of the data, please let us know. We'd love to share it with the community as an example that might be replicated elsewhere. I know a wide variety of skill sets exist in this room and also online, and it's really valuable as there's interest to share that with our community most easily on Slack. So with that, I'll just leave up my contact info, where these slides are available, and once again, the Slack channel, because I hope you join. Thank you.